Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Lynn.
There's Carol almost.
It's 10 o'clock, so I'm David Greider, and I said I would do a presentation today to give a different view of climate change than the one we saw last week. Thank you, Jason, except he's not here to talk about it.
Not here to defend himself.
To defend himself, yeah, exactly. And I am of the opinion that it really doesn't matter if we treat climate change as a religion. It certainly does make a difference what our opinions are in terms of how we address challenges. And climate change is certainly a possible challenge. My opinion is that it's a significant challenge and that we should pay attention to philosophy and ethics with regarding climate change. Philosophy clearly is an ancient study of what's proper, what's appropriate. Ethics is the subset of philosophy related to that. I'm not a philosophy major. I'm not I think I took one class in philosophy, and that was obviously 50 years ago. I know Stan has studied that considerably more than I have, and I'm guessing that there are lots of people who know lots more about it than I do, and I hesitate to be even addressing what philosophy has to say about the quote problem of unquote climate change, climate chaos. But the people who study ecology, the people who study the carbon cycle, plants and animals cycling carbon through the world that we live in, tell us that humans are upsetting the quote natural unquote carbon cycle. Carol, you had a question?
No, just a comment.
Okay.
I think we should also consider in this context a philosophy of science.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Which basically says we can't prove a law, but we can disprove it. And so we should be as thorough as we know how to be about our theorizing, and as such, we're going to know more about disproving our theory and how it should be or could be done than people who don't study it at all.
Yeah. It also says that a valid scientific hypothesis states the conditions under which it would be disproved.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
None of this wishy-washy, can't quite pin it down stuff.
Mm-hmm. And if it can't be tested, it's probably science fiction instead of science, or pseudoscience instead of science.
Well, okay, so that's everything we know of string theory and Big Bang and all
You
that.
just cut in on us without raising your hand. Thank you. Tom, would you be willing to watch who raises their hand and call on people if I'm not doing it?
Okay. Hey,
But
Dean, your hand.
I
Go
am
ahead.
doing it. So, Dean, you had a comment.
I've been waiting for Tom to come in and call the class to order here.
Yeah.
Yeah, so how do we test the Big Bang? How do we test 11 universes? How do we test string theory? So is that really science?
Some of it is still science fiction. And as our technology gets better, some of it becomes testable, and then there is the possibility that it may become science instead of science fiction, in my opinion. Yeah, if you're involved in a
Tom is
discussion.
eating. Yeah. I mean, we have been testing human-caused climate change. Unfortunately, the experiment is going to run several hundred years.
No.
Well, I mean, it's running in real time now.
It's running in real time, and we've been testing it for the last 70 years.
Yes, agreed.
I just pulled a book out of the library called Overshoot that was written in 1980. 1980 is 45 years ago. And unfortunately, the introduction is just as good today as it was 45 years ago.
Going to read us this
Sam?
introduction?
Well,
I mean, we barely started, but we have a lot of comments. Go ahead, Stan.
right.
This is just to support your notion of the refinement version of things that we understand scientifically. John Locke, a philosopher, posited the idea that there were primary qualities and secondary qualities. Primary qualities could be measured, and secondary qualities were kind of a version of sensory perception. Now, primary qualities would be like, measuring the volume and the density of something, or the length and the width and the dimensions of something. And color for him at that time was sensory and not measurable. Therefore, it was not primary information. But then we were able to, thanks to Maxwell, measure the wavelength of colors and light, and then that shifted into the primary category. So that's one of the things about instrumentation and engineering applied to science that can transition things from being secondary, tertiary, into primary measurable. But that doesn't account for quantum reality, which is another discussion.
And at some point, it might be worth talking about how quantum science is going to affect the future. But I kind of would like to get back to the philosophical discussion of ethics. I've still got two hands, so Tom, you haven't said anything. Go ahead.
Well, Dean had his hand up before I did.
Well, Dean said a lot lately.
Well, okay. I just wanted to say that one of the topics that Dean mentioned was the Big Bang. It's not really testable, he says, but we're actually getting closer to testing that with JWST. It's finding a lot more information about what happened very close to the beginning of the universe as we know it, and it's maybe suggesting that we have to make some modifications to some of the astrophysics, some of the physics. So
as the tools get
that's
better,
how science works.
Yeah, that's how science works. As the tools get better, the theory has to apply. The theories that are still, quote, scientific are the theories that have been able to apply to more data, more different kinds of tests.
Right. The primary thing, as Carol said, is that it has to be testable. And we're getting close to testing some of the ideas regarding the beginning of our universe and possibility of multiverses. One thing that's really not testable yet is string theory. So I still think that's fiction. I never went for that one.
I'm not sure that the red shift that we use to determine distances in astronomy isn't possibly mistaken. It's just as easy to suggest that the possibility exists that the constants that we talk about in physical constants
Are not constant.
are not constant.
Such as the cosmological constant in Einstein's gravity, or H bar, Schrodinger's.
Which throws all of the things that we can measure on Earth into question. All we can do is look at the light that comes to Earth from around us. And we're making assumptions. And we're making, quote, the simplest assumption that will explain the data that we get. And the simplest assumption is to say, oh, everything is constant. And so the red shift that we're seeing is related to the expansion of the universe. That's an assumption. And until we actually go there, we're not going to be able to test that assumption. And someday maybe we'll go there, but at the moment, our technology doesn't allow us to do that. But all of this is a side issue. Are you done, Tom? Have we beat that horse to death?
Yeah. Dean still has his hand up.
Yeah,
still have your hand
I've
up.
had my hand up again. Do any of you know of the podcast / show Hidden Brain?
No, put it in the chat.
Oh my God, no, it's a must listen to. And
put
I
it in
catch
the
it.
chat.
Yeah, I will put it in the chat. Anyway, this kind of relates.
Please.
They were talking about numbers and the philosophy and the science or whatever you want to call it, numbers. And they go, and the major discussion is why you cannot divide by 0. And there are people, and I've been one of them, arguing with professors that we could define a way to divide by 0. Why not? Anyway, then they got off into, well, there's no such thing as the square root of -9. Well, yes, there is. It's called imaginary numbers, and without them, and she said, are they important? Well, the world we know wouldn't exist without the math of imaginary numbers. They are necessary.
They are useful in engineering.
Well,
that doesn't change them being imaginary.
He claimed that there are no ICs, no chips. We in electrical engineering, you use them in motor theory, imaginary numbers and the voltage and all that. Mm-hmm. So yeah, they are useful concepts. Mm-hmm. That tools that we need. In other words, we have to think bigger than, or differently in some contexts about our whole number system and.
Well, yeah. Imaginary numbers, square root of -1 numbers, are orthogonal to real numbers. So they're useful, that they're like having another dimension when you're using your formula, because it's at right angles to every other dimension. So that's why they're useful. Go ahead, Tom.
Imaginary numbers were very poorly named.
Yes.
Oh, they had other names.
I know they did. And numbers that are orthogonal to both the normal numbers and imaginary numbers also have a name that I don't remember at the moment. And there isn't any necessary limit to the number of ways you can go orthogonal to the number line. But imaginary was an especially bad name. They are very actual.
Yes, and the combination of real and imaginary numbers are complex numbers, which I'm sure David would approve of.
We should continue with
Yes.
David's presentation.
There's a presentation here.
Hey,
No,
there's
no, there
not.
absolutely
No.
is. And that is what I thought of when I was sitting there in front of 7-Eleven listening to this on the radio. I said, oh my God, there is a whole, the future of numbers.
would you put that together for us?
I'm working on it.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and when I heard the term complex numbers, I said, I'm in.
Yeah.
Well, those
Okay.
are a real mathematical definition. I mean,
Mhm.
speaking as an old math teacher,
Mhm.
What a great term. It hooks
yes,
stupid minds like mine. Complex. Well, the world is complex.
Okay, let's go back to
yes.
um,
The world is
ethics.
complex. It has real and imaginary parts.
Okay, let's continue.
Let's go back to ethics. And what should we be doing about our energy use? And how would an ethical professor suggest that we should just think about this question? Is it even a question? Well, we've pretty well decided that humans are off-balancing the carbon cycle. Pre-industrial, well, if you go back to when we were hunting and gathering, it's fairly clear that there weren't enough of us and we weren't affecting the natural cycles very much. Although there is some question about humans being the apex predator and being very hard on other large mammals as we spread from Africa to the Americas. The other large mammals died off. And so there is some discussion about whether we were impacting our environment significantly, even back then. But since we've discovered fossil fuels in the last 200 years, we could be said to have 600 fossil slaves per person in the United States today. We use still more energy per person than any other country in the world. So the United States, if anyone is impacting global climate, we have the longest history. We are the preeminent nation. We've had more effect than anybody else. And we probably still have as much effect as anybody else. Now, that's not equally distributed. I've seen it written that 10% of the population in the United States creates 40% of the carbon dioxide pollution, if you want to think of it that way. So just the difference in prosperity between our richest quartile and our poorest quartile in the United States has a different effect on our environment. What would an ethicist say about that? Well, is the benefit evenly distributed? I think it's fairly clear that it's not. What do other people think? Would they agree with me on that? How about a thumbs up if you agree? I only see a couple one hand and one thumb up, two thumbs up. Come on. Three thumbs up. Thank you. Four thumbs up. Warren, you're giving me that which usually indicates you kind of agree, kind of don't. Why would you not just say sure?
Because I don't believe what I'm told.
Okay.
I'm not. I don't know. I don't know.
Well,
I'm a skeptic. So
okay, and it's appropriate to be skeptical.
yeah.
But it's kind of hard to say. Most of us don't actually have any choice in what contributes the electricity that comes into our house.
No.
Is there any argument about that?
Tiny choice.
Yeah.
Well, you can choose to pay more.
Lithium batteries, carbon batteries. But that's about it.
Tom's roof versus my roof.
Everybody's just cutting in. We have an imaginary choice here in California for decades. We can so-called choose how to source our power. It's a imaginary scam that's been going on forever.
And you deregulated your power, but in point of fact, your wires coming into your house are still a monopoly. There's one company that supplies that.
And they supposedly have to, there's all this junk that's been going on for 40 years. And but I can control where my power comes from. It comes from my roof, and it goes into Stan's Tesla wall, which I don't have yet. But, so there is that.
Potentially.
Carol?
Was that someone calling on me?
Yep.
Your hand's up.
Hey, David, I'm having a little trouble with your math. Are you figuring that the farmer who owns the cows that are putting methane into the atmosphere as one contributor? Are you figuring the people who own the factory that is putting smoke into the air? How are you figuring this?
What I've said was that we're not all equally responsible. We're not
Right, but you were talking about the 40% of the population that...
No, I was talking about 10% of the population produces 40% of the carbon dioxide that's released into the atmosphere related to our economy in the United States.
Okay, so we're just talking CO2.
No, we're talking gases that would affect the climate.
Okay, CO2, methane,
Yeah.
freon.
The climate is being impacted. It used to be better. We're in a period of time about 15,000 years long that has been a sweet spot, if you will, as opposed with regard to climate. And before that, it was colder.
You can go back to where the glaciers were down into Minnesota.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And that was natural.
The Milankovitch cycles have to do with the orbit of the Earth around the sun. And we've known for, 100 years now, that orbit goes through cycles. It gets closer and farther away from the sun, and so the amount of sunlight reaching the Earth changes according to a predictable orbit. And the better we understand exactly what the orbit is, the more accurately we can count that, and the more precisely we can figure it. That we think is natural. There's nothing we have done so far to affect that. In fact, it's only been the last 200 years that we think the human population has been big enough that the effects were starting to be significant to change the climate. But from an ethical point of view, what's the best that we could do? You have to look at who's doing it. Now, the United States, us, basically right now is the government. The government sets the rules for corporations. The government sets the rules for individuals. We got 3 hands up. Which order, Tom?
Eric's first.
I think one of the funniest to me, because all you can do is laugh at the world, is examples of the total cynicism and inequality of the high priests that are leading and promoting and exploiting the global warming religion. Because recently they knocked down about 8 miles of the Amazon rainforest so that the high priests, the leaders of the global warming religion, when they go to meet, they fly to Belém first in their private jets, which each flight takes releases about as much carbon as the average American releases in a whole year. And they knocked down 8 miles of the rainforest so they could ride more conveniently to their meeting to discuss how to save the rainforest. That's all.
Yeah. No,
All I can do is laugh. I can't do anything about this.
right.
Hey, Dean.
I'm back up. Yeah, I heard several things. But yeah, one was, there's some debate about what the humans were doing to the large mammals. And no, there's very little debate about it. It was the tipping point where the 10, 20,000, however many Native Americans, because, humans, we have a very disproportionate effect on our environment compared with other species.
Yeah, we commonly call ourselves an apex predator.
We're an apex of the apex predators with our technology, and technology was arrows and spears
and we cooperate.
Oh yeah. Which is why it works for wolves and it works for lions and yep.
And we don't have very much problem with wolves or lions because we cooperate and we write down our knowledge and our culture collects technology and improves technology.
Right.
And at this point, there aren't any other apex predators on Earth to compete with us.
And that's the reason that we adore what we call dogs and they adore us because we have a lot in common. I mean, my cat thinks I'm the Wizard of Oz, because I can hold up a remote and make a little space heater turn on and move it over and heat her and all that. And she just thinks I'm a god.
Sort of.
Sort of.
Yeah, she worships in a limited fashion.
Oh, yeah, because she says, no, cats are the gods, ask the Egyptians. And
that's a side issue that
Yep.
we probably don't want to get into.
Well,
The
no, no,
point
no.
I'm trying to make is that ethics looks at these kinds of questions, and in a way, Eric's point is well taken. It's pretty silly, some of the ways that some people don't pay attention to their
Yeah.
effects. And the question is, are we paying attention? For
Dan,
example, ethics might suggest that it's the greatest good for the greatest number that should be the determinant of proper behavior. Or you could say, first do no harm, which the doctors have been talking about for 2,000 years. Of course, back then they used leeches, but yeah, there are some questions. Okay, I see 4 hands. Who's first?
Dan,
Well, when I think about ethics, the top person for me was Kant's and his categorical imperative, which simplified to a 6th grader would be, what if everybody did that?
Right? Yeah.
So that would be one way. Then there's Machiavellian, which is where you need to have certain codes of cleverness or cunningness, strategic techniques to gain power, which sometimes do ugly things. I mean, let's face it, when we train our soldiers to kill the enemy, we have to be careful about determining who the enemy is and when it's not necessarily true all at all times. And in order for people to do an unethical thing, you have to be able to give them some sort of a mental construct to be able to divert their consciousness in a way to handle that. So you can call the enemy something dehumanizing them in some way. All of you know what I'm talking about. But I think that the one character in our discussion, which doesn't get a chance to get its hand up to describe what it's feeling about things, is the environment. And we tend to discard that as being something that we don't care about until it raises its ugly head and gives us California fires and wild floods, and takes our environmental oceans and takes the fish out of the oceans. The acidity of the ocean takes away our coral reefs. What Senator Sheldon Whitehouse would call the consequences level of our misbehavior with the earth.
Also often phrased, nature bats last.
Carol, you're next.
Okay, I think it's necessary to look at the fact that it's not just the human race being an apex predator that messes up the environment. We can look at the fact that way prior to the industrial age, the human race basically desertified the Middle East by herding sheep and goats in an environment where they were in an environment that was insufficiently wet for them to not be a disaster.
Mhm.
And everybody's heard the phrase, the cedars of Lebanon.
Mhm.
There are no cedars in Lebanon anymore, and it's because of herding those sheep and goats. And it happened before the industrial age. So we got to be a little careful.
Well, but that's overgrazing. They were not treating the commons as commons. And if you're not careful, you get yourself in trouble.
Yeah. But I mean, you can't overgraze in England, for instance, because it's so wet an environment that the sheep and goats are never going to be digging up the plants to eat the roots. You know, it very much depends on your environment.
Tom,
I'm going to go back further to Heraclitus. You can't step twice in the same river.
Okay.
It's it's been a half a century since I've been to Yellowstone, and I don't think I'd recognize it. It's true that now they handle millions of visitors a year. I'm not sure that's a good thing.
Well, it's
The-
not
the-
a wilderness. You can't
No.
have a wilderness and 1 million visitors a year.
No, I agree. Marty sometimes asks if we should go, and I say, I'm not sure. I'd rather have my memories.
Yeah.
okay, Carol, and then Dean.
No, I should take my hand down. I made the
Okay.
point.
Yeah.
And Dean's
Carol
up.
is perpetually up. Dean is up. And why doesn't my hand lower? Okay, click on the button. There we go. Yeah, we were talking about ethics, and well, the purest form of ethics as we practice it is situational ethics. Great term. And my other little offhanded thing, there's a thing when you meet someone, what, on an airplane, whatever, what do you do? And then what they mean is, who are you? What are your bona fides? What do you do for a living? And there was just a brilliant young guy who, not well educated, said, what do you do? And he said, I have my stock answer to that, and I still use it. And he said, that depends on the situation. And you see what I'm saying? That is our humanness. So, what I do, and I'm not, well, I lived what I lived. When you're talking about dehumanizing people, I had to do it in Vietnam to survive. I despise the term zipperheads, gooks, etc., etc. But when someone is trying to kill you, you have to dehumanize your enemy. It is the only way that you can kill them to survive, and that's just a fact. It and has been for 2 million years, 200,000 years. It's built into our genome. We can't. We have to hate someone. I would hope, unless we're a psychopath. If we're truly Homo sapien, we have to hate that someone in order for us to survive. And, for better or for worse, that is who we are.
So what does that have to do with the ethics of climate change?
Well,
It has a
we'll
lot.
get back to that. Just a
It
second.
has a lot to. It has a lot to do with that because.
Thank you, Dean. You made your point. I'd like to.
Well, I didn't understand his point. I was asking a clarifying question.
I'd like to
Yeah.
respond to that point.
You would like me to respond?
No. I want to
David
say
wants to
something.
respond to you.
I would know. Tom was asking me for clarification response. I think.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I mean, since God, how do I explain it?
Situational ethics we can get
Well,
into.
what I mean is, yeah, I hope many of us are philosophically at our core ethical, because ethics and altruism are built into our DNA, or we wouldn't have got here. But when it comes to making decisions in our own lives, all of us, like the people that burn as much carbon commuting from across the country and call themselves green and all that. We all tend to do things in our own self-interest and just conveniently push our core ethics aside situationally. And is that a good thing? No, not in the end. And it's why I recycle everything, knowing that 95% of it is going to go to the landfill anyway. But I am employing people to do that sorting for me. So yeah, I mean, all we can do is try. And when you say 1980, that is when I understood human-caused global warming. I don't know where the rest of the world has been, and I'm not the only one, trust me.
Yep.
We have two more
Lynn?
hands. Yeah.
Yes, to pull this back to climate change, I would propose that an equally or perhaps even more effective way of allowing yourself to kill other human beings rather than demonizing them is indifference.
Well, maybe. And your hand's still up. Stan?
I tried to take it down. I don't have the icon to do it. It'll go away eventually.
Should be a lower hand icon in there somewhere.
There should be a menu
above the
across
react
the
button.
bottom. And in
It
the menu,
says
there-
raise hand, but if I click on it, my raised hand goes away. So it's a toggle. Thank you.
Hey, Stan.
I think that this, I'm going to sidetrack just briefly on this discussion about.
No, wait a minute. We've done too much sidetracking.
Yeah.
Let's go back to ethics and climate change and talk about the most obvious go, no-go gauge that we can think of, which is killing.
Which is what?
Killing.
Oh,
We can tell when somebody dies. That, and if there's a direct causal chain, and that's the other question, can we produce a direct causal chain? Then you have to say, are you taking responsibility for your behavior, or are you paying all the real costs of your behavior? Stan?
In the chat, I saw this just last night. It's a very nice documentary about the 1952 smog in London, where they were basically out of business for 5 days. It was so thick that they couldn't see. They couldn't even have ball games. They couldn't see the ball. And as a result of that, there's this discussion in that video about what they did. They came up with a Clean Air Act. The doctors reported that there are a lot of deaths because of that smog that were immediately related to that smog right after the smog happened. But there was a duration of time after that that they considered maybe up to 4,000 deaths were caused by that smog, and they started to do things to do about it. So I think that's basically a little example, a snippet of how that's been handled in another country.
Yeah, yeah. And when I talked about a direct causal relationship, unfortunately with these kinds of issues, it changes the odds of health questions after that time. Carol?
Britain quit burning soft coal after that 1952 disaster. And that pretty much made the problem go away.
Pretty much.
I mean, it was
It helped a lot.
It was legally promoted that you cannot burn soft coal anymore.
Yeah.
And most people were heating their homes with it.
Mhm.
and factories that were in town.
Dean?
But that was partly because of the war that they had to ration coal differently.
Hey, Stan, I didn't see your hand. Dean, you're next.
All right, so yeah, I probably have told this story, but my dad lived in LA, born in Las Vegas, lived in LA as a child. When you could stand and rode the red line, the trolleys, and before GM and Standard Oil came in and put them out of business. And yeah, and there was a time when I wouldn't go to LA because my eyes would burn, my
Yeah.
lungs would burn, and I was smoking 2 packs a day, and I couldn't stand it. And now, because of the tail that wags the dog, catalytic converters et al. LA on a good day will be quite amazingly clear and a livable city, which only makes it more unlivable because more millions move there. And yeah, I mean, we got that whole ant farm thing going on, but yeah. All right, that was my comment. But in other words, we have seen real-time change in microclimates, if you will,
Mhm.
in my lifetime, certainly in my dad's lifetime.
And you've all sat through a couple of my presentations from Rethink X, where they talked about the prospects for the ecology are brighter than most people are aware of, related to prosperity. And if we're rich enough, we can afford to clean up our pollution.
But did you say prosperity or posterity?
Prosperity. We can afford to clean up our pollution. And that's a Band-Aid fix, if you will, when it might be better to provide the prosperity in a fashion that didn't create the pollution. Yeah? Dean? You're muted.
Yeah, my isn't working, but I'll deal with that. Yeah, a Band-Aid fix when we might need a tourniquet.
Maybe. Yeah. I'd like to talk a little more about killing people. We know that there are at least 3 easy ways to kill people. I mean, you can actually have human violence, war, or other forms of violence, disease, and starvation. And I'd like to look at the alternative in each case: health, peace, and prosperity. And suggest ethically we'd like to create those instead of killing people. And in the case of climate change, it gets a little fuzzy when you talk about sea level rise. But that particular change, will it indeed cause the death of people who stay on low-lying islands? Tom?
I think we need to look beyond killing people. Climate change affects a lot of
Yeah, but
living things in our
let's not go
environment,
there.
which indirectly affect people.
Let's not go there quite yet. I'm just using killing people as an extreme that we can easily see, because it gets less easy to see when you talk about impacting probabilities of health, for example, right?
I'm talking about starvation. If we kill off the plants and animals that we eat, it makes it harder for people to survive,
Yeah, absolutely.
which kills them indirectly.
Yeah, absolutely. So looking at the extremes, I mean, we would like not to look at the extremes. Usually the wisdom is some kind of balance in between the extremes, but it's often easy to see the extremes. And I saw a chart of the precautionary principle recently, where the insurance companies look at the extremes, even though most of the time they don't have to. But it's usually fairly easy to tell when you're out on the extreme. If we cause climate change that causes sea level rise, the nations on the small island chains in the Far East or the Caribbean, the extreme would be if they stayed where they were and drowned. So clearly that can cause the death of humans. So would it be ethical for a small benefit in the United States to destroy a small nation, island nation, for example? Would that be an ethical choice? Not that the United States pays much attention to ethical choices, but if we're going to talk about ethics, if we're going to pay costs for reasons of ethics, and that's essentially what I'm saying we haven't been doing. Well, it would be, and propaganda is often a different way of looking at something that we think probably is unethical. Anyway, Tom?
I guess I look at it a little bit differently. The ethics of choice you're talking about, we don't necessarily choose to kill people. And we don't see the indirect ramifications of what we do. And that those could kill people indirectly.
Yeah.
But establishing the chain of causality is difficult for people. And that's where the ethics gets a little murky.
And it gets even more murky if you say, well, it probably isn't appropriate for a little benefit to one person to kill another person. And oh, by the way, when you kill them, there's no going back. It's real obvious. It's a one-way street. And ecologically, it's pretty common that there are step changes that there's no going back. If you salt a garden, it's gonna, there's no way to unsalt it cheaply. Okay, I'm not sure. Dean or Stan?
Yeah, well,
Anyone was first.
I was first. I can't hear myself, but I can hear you great on my Sony. Yeah, and I'm a home cook, and you can always put more salt in your food. It is impossible to take it out. You can't dilute it enough. Yeah, I'll defer to Stan. I'm tired of listening to myself, and I know you guys are.
Okay, Stan.
Well, I think that I lost my thought. I'll come back later.
Okay, it'll come back.
Okay, David.
I talked about no regrets in my title. I'm not sure that's possible, but at least it seems like one way of treating the, it came back. Stan? I'm sorry, Dean.
Oh, no, I was channeling Stan. He's probably came back. Yeah, the no regrets thing. I mean, that is very philosophical. I mean, will you do? You know, I don't know. It's baked into my DNA. Ethics and altruism. I learned before I could speak almost, and but yeah, but at some point, one has to admit that one is human, and one made mistakes, and some of them horrible mistakes, and to live in a state of regret. And yeah, do I regret the pollution that I have caused in my lifetime? You better believe it. Yeah. You know, in Missouri, we burned trash. That's how everybody got rid of their trash. In Minnesota, we didn't have garbage man. We had an incinerator. And what were we doing even back then? You know, and we were creating yeah, but I mean, regrets doesn't redress what you have done, but it can help you. It can affect your future behavior. So regret can be constructive, and it can eat you up also at the same time. So it's getting that balance.
And it's great to have a balance. But let's look at the extremes because it's easier to analyze the cause and effect. Stan?
Yeah.
Okay, I remember now. I forgot because it was something that I had learned long ago, but I still believe in. There is an issue in philosophy called the free will, freedom of the will.
Mm-hmm.
It goes on for quite a long time, and there are certain sides to that story. But the one I like the most is called soft determinism, and it's called, and basically the algorithm of it is simply that if your desires were different, you might have done otherwise, or you could have done otherwise. Making the idea of decision making and reason is sort of is kind of underneath your desire. And if your desire is A, B, C, your rationale might be, your plan might be this X, Y, Z. But if your desires change, then everything gets different. And you might desire to do this, and then it's like the spider web I talked about a couple weeks ago. You touch it one single point, but water drops fall off everywhere on the spider web. So that's it.
And that's another example of a non-reversible change. And that's what we're dealing with when we talk about the environment. Some of the changes are reversible and some of the changes are not. And our concern is that we're changing things we don't realize we're changing, and they may not be reversible. Carol?
Unfortunately, the chief disaster coming from rising sea levels is not that you wipe out a few island nations. It's that you decrease the size of the polar caps, which decreases the amount of energy that is reflected back off of the planet, and you desalinate the water that is coming off of the polar caps enough that you are likely to destroy the Gulf Stream.
throwing the northern hemisphere back into an ice age.
Yeah,
That
In
could
Europe.
that could kill a lot of people.
yes. But I'm saying that those are the major results of rising sea levels, not we've wiped out a few islands. Unpleasant as that may be, and reprehensible as it may be, those things are bigger consequences.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. Gene?
And I think I'm unmuted. I can't hear myself in this.
We can hear you, and we'd tell you if you were muted.
All right. And so the islands we're talking about ultimately are that thing we call Florida, which is nothing but an atoll made of what is it, Carol? Limestone, I think. Yeah.
Coral.
Yeah, whatever. Yeah, coral, exactly. Yeah. And we're talking about the eastern seaboard, and we're talking about much of the Gulf, ultimately, as in losing part of low-lying lands everywhere. It's not just. I mean, the little islands in the Pacific are a great example. They are the canary in the coal mine, and we need to pay attention to that because that is ringing the bell, and people aren't hearing the bell. And when Stan talked about the wildfires in California, uh, right now would be the second time in my life I couldn't drive to the to Key West. And the first one was Homestead, the hurricane, whatever, that decimated southern Miami-Dade County. And now it's on fire. And they closed Highway 1 going to the Keys because of fire in southern Florida. And their fire watch is all the way up to Palm Beach right now, but it's they're going to get some rain and etc. So now we are seeing it in real time, and if someone chooses to not believe their eyes, I know the farmers in the Midwest do. They understand climate change big time, and they still keep voting how they're voting, but that might be changing. Who knows? But yeah, no, it is very real. I mean, and what I am hearing is that uh, the the climate predictors are saying, "Oh my God, we thought this was theory, and it would come true in my son's lifetime, my daughter's lifetime, and we are seeing effects at a greater rate, at a lower rise in global temperature. In other words, holding it at 2.4 or whatever, maybe that's not even enough. When I cook, if I want something to be at 145 degrees with my instant read, well, I got to stop at about 125, 130 and let it coast up. Well, we're getting the coast effect. And, if we stop putting carbon in the atmosphere tomorrow, it's going to take a while for that to mitigate.
Yeah, it would eventually mitigate, we think, but we're not sure. And if we go through some step changes, it may not mitigate ever. So there are some risks here.
Well, I mean, nothing will mitigate forever. I mean, all of the stuff we've caused, but yeah, we can certainly. I mean, it's
the
best we can do.
Cycles tell us that the climate is going to vary on Earth, whether we like it or not. We're not likely to change the Milankovitch cycle. Yeah?
Tom?
Okay. Rising sea levels is an important effect of global warming, but I wouldn't say it's the most dangerous or the main one. acidification of the oceans, killing the corals and many other things like that is a big thing. People say the the Amazon rainforest is the lungs of the world. Well, it's really not. It's the oceans. They're the lungs of the world. And there are lots of other big rainforests too, like in Indonesia and Canada. So Brazil's not the only place we have to worry about, but it's the oceans really that we have to worry about, and the effects due to changes in the ocean are going to be very wide-reaching and hard to reverse. As you were saying, things eventually will reverse if we can stop, adding to the fuel in the fire that we've already started. But we're changing the climate much faster than it would change naturally, and it will take much longer to recover from the changes we've made in the last 100, 200 years than it took to make the change. So we're looking at long-term effects, and humans aren't very good at looking at that.
Unfortunately, you're absolutely correct. I have a couple of videos, and I'm not sure, would you rather just discuss ethics, or would you like to see some
We want
data
to see your
work from?
videos.
Yeah. For me, I think I've had my hand on both. But yeah, I mean, I feel like we used to think about beyond our life, children and our grandchildren, and how are we, and I'm not sure we do anymore. I think it's live for today, it seems like. And we are, and there's a term you're going to have to give me when you talk about the cyclic change of climate. And we are going into a mini ice age. We know that. And are we mitigating it somewhat? Probably, maybe, but who cares?
Well,
Because in the end,
some
I
of
want
the-
to
one
see
of-
your videos.
One of the philosophical approaches to ethics, I believe, was the hedonist, wasn't it? Live for today.
Yep.
Eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. I think is the usual. Yeah. What, Dean?
Well, everybody in favor of watching your videos, raise your hand. I just did.
Yeah,
Okay,
let's
well,
go. Let's continue.
Okay. I had one that, as I say, the Rethink X is potentially very positive about the future, and particularly prosperity in the future, which may or may not mitigate climate change somewhat. And that's an area of discussion and ethics that I wanted to get into. But the particular video I had to do with the other side of last week's discussion, where we saw a video about the potential benefits to nuclear power. Stan, if you play the presentation from Rethink X. Dean, did you have your hand up because you wanted to make a comment?
No, I did.
A question?
No. I did have my hand up. So he's already sort of kind of lost me a bit, but because he pretends. Okay, so the myth of free power, atoms for peace, that was a myth, right? That was a sales pitch.
Well, no,
But
they said,
he acts like solar panels come down from the gods. They don't. There is a lot of pollution involved in solar panels also. And how you crunch those numbers, God only knows. But yeah, I mean, you know what I mean?
that's an argument that's been made against solar panels. And
Yeah.
there are arguments that have been made against wind generators that the
Right.
current blades we use are not easily recyclable or are very expensive to recycle.
Right.
Those are both reasonable discussion points. In terms of ethics, we need to be looking at the consequences of our actions. We need to be looking at the full cost array associated with our energy use. I agree with that. But as far as I can tell, most of the pollution associated with photovoltaic panels is associated with the recycling of them, isn't it? I mean, there certainly are some negative effects of the mining of the minerals used in their construction. How that compares with coal, I would say, is pretty obvious. You're mining a lot more coal for the same amount of energy than creating photovoltaic panels and using them for 20 years and then recycling. Just the volume. Right? You still got your hand up, or?
No, Tom was way before me.
Oh,
Tom Walsh.
oh, did you have something else to say though, or?
Possibly, but I want to hear Tom.
Okay. Then put your hand down.
Okay. Well, it's a tentative up. Go ahead, Tom.
Tom, you're muted. Do you want me to stop the videos when people raise their hand and bring up a point, or would you prefer to go
We
through the video?
prefer to see
first?
the whole video.
I have 2 points to make. One is I don't think we should interrupt the videos.
Right.
We should go to the end. And number 2 is that when we're looking at the cost of the production of things, we have to look at total cost. There's the cost of production, cost of use, cost, and the end life cost, and how long the life is.
Life cycle.
Life cycle. And yes, there is a cost in producing photovoltaics. But there's also a very high cost in producing fossil fuels for consumption too. And while they're being used, the photovoltaics and wind are very low in associated costs compared to fossil fuels. And then at the end of the life, that's where you have different kinds of I don't know what the term is, but yes, you have recycling of the photovoltaics and the wind generators, but you also have recycling of the engines or whatever that use, or furnaces, whatever that use the fossil fuels. So you have to look at all phases of the life cycle, and when you do that, the fossil fuels come out behind. It's pretty simple, but I think we should see the rest of this video where he's talking mostly about nuclear.
But real quick, yeah, I mean, if we're talking about this and this versus fossil fuels, come on, we're beyond that. But you see, everyone likes a monochrome world. That's why we love good old black and white TV and black and white movies. But we have to think in least in terms of 4-bit grayscale. So, okay, you love solar and wind, therefore nukes are evil, incarnate, or vice versa. Baloney. We have to. I think we can do A and B and C and let the winner rise to the top.
Well, but from a no regrets point of view, we can justify using the cheapest form rather than paying extra. But there's all sorts of engineering trade-offs, and none of these questions are simple.
Nope.
Is a little bit of benefit for a lot of people worth causing a lot of harm for a few people? That's a tough question to answer.
Yep.
In detail. And
Yep.
that question comes up over and over and over again with energy use.
And because the answers are not simple is the reason that we as humans and government aren't maybe capable of dealing with it. I don't know. But anyway, I'll shut up. I want to get back to the video, but I want to hear what Eric has.
We do have one more hand up.
I just want to know if he is going to give solider numbers, more reliable numbers than people like
Well,
Vaca.
I'd like to know too, because I'd like
Debunked
to see the
what
video.
he says already with pretty solid numbers.
Let's see the
Frankly,
video. Maybe there will be numbers.
isn't he-
I'm tempted to cut the video off right here. Stan, shut it down. Let me show you a couple solid numbers. I'm not sure which one it is next.
And is he just going to attack old nuclear or the newest plausible, the doable
Eric,
technologies?
He won't in this particular video, but I will. Okay? The new nuclear is unproven. China is proving the numbers. So look at China. Okay? Nuclear is nuclear is dead in the United States in terms of fission. Fusion, maybe. But it's unproven at this point. It's been 20 years away for 40 years now.
Wait, why do you say fission is there's very intelligent, knowledgeable engineers and experts that say the newest nuclear technology is better in almost every way than and for most cases, solar is good in some places, or wind, even that kind of extremist Zihan, he admits that solar and wind are only worthwhile in very limited areas.
Zihan has solar collectors on his roof.
Yeah, but they work where apparently then
they work in Denver. They
in
work
limited areas.
relatively well.
Yeah, in limited areas, but not
Actually,
not going to work in not great in Minnesota unless
They cover all my electrical needs. And
they work well enough in Minnesota too. The question in some ways is, what are the costs associated with them?
And Germany's been a failure. In Germany, a disaster.
That's right. That's right.
Where they don't have reliable winds or sunshine.
Yeah, I think I'm up. It's not a science problem; it's an engineering problem, and all of these are engineering problems. Scientists are great.
See the video.
Yeah, let's see the video. But Doug's been up for a while.
I just wanted to share with you guys that this past week, there's been a major push at the Minnesota legislature to open it up again for nuclear. And the group that I'm involved with is, pushing back on it, of course. But it's out there again, and one of the drivers seems to be the data centers that really everybody's so freaked out about that they can't produce enough energy other than to use nuclear. So anyway, it's happening right in our backyard.
There are a number of reasons why nuclear is not going to solve the data center problems. It takes 10 years to manufacture a nuclear solution. 10 years, the data centers may be necessary, but if you look at electrical use in the United States over the last 100 years, it's been flat for the last 10. I have a chart somewhere that I could show you of electrical use in the United States over the last 100 years. And basically, electricity went up by 100, a factor of 100 in 100 years, and then flattened out for the last 10. Well, mostly. I mean, there's some jiggles, but mostly it flattened out.
Yep.
And the reason is because we've transitioned to LED light bulbs that use, what, a tenth of the energy that incandescent light bulbs used to use, and they were expensive.
David, I've got a chart from Lawrence Livermore Labs that show all the production of energy and where it ends up, and the majority of it is lost in efficiency along the way, whether it's lines or whatever. So it's really an awesome chart.
Yep. And I think Stan used that in a
We see
presentation
the
a little bit
video,
ago.
as we've already agreed to do.
Yeah.
I'm sorry?
Video.
Could you guys quit squabbling and let us see the video?
No.
No,
Because I'm
no,
running
no,
it.
we cannot. And I
You
want to
can-
hear what
you-
Lynn has to
You
say.
can go back and watch the rest of the video. I'm delighted to have you look at.
You
I
can
will
watch
sup-
on your own time. I can't
Right.
listen to you brilliant people.
Well,
But it's who uses the power. Bill Gates is buying 3 Mile Island.
wait. Dean, it's not your turn.
Well, Lynn is not
Lynn,
talking.
it's your turn. You're muted.
I am not motivated to say this because my husband is the presenter. I'm motivated to say this because I cannot sit still. Until Doug spoke, I had not heard one new fact or opinion from any speaker in the group. If you want to flout your own opinions, sign up to do a presentation. Thank
Yeah,
you.
please get a hold of me. I would love to schedule other presenters. I have a couple of holes to fill, in fact. Dean?
All right, so it is. I understand leveling of the. It is who is using that, and it's Silicon Valley. We as consumers are consuming less, but we're consuming it through Bitcoin, TikTok, AI, etc., etc., etc.
And that demand is predicted by people who are expecting to make money from the AI.
Of course.
And they're predicting that will take lots of jobs and potentially destabilize the whole country.
Yep.
Maybe we should think about making a rule against that, or making the electricity twice as expensive to pay climate reparations to the rest of the world for whom we've dumped the CO2 into the atmosphere.
I've known that for 40, 50 years. Yeah.
Yeah, well,
We have,
we're
we
not
have never
willing to
paid the
do
real
it.
cost of what we do. Europe has been doing more of it for decades.
And they've been paying twice as much for their gasoline.
Right. And gasoline, well, okay, it's $7 a gallon in California. Well, it should be 12.
Tom?
The forecasts of 10 years to build a power plant are not going to be met. Current delivery time for a power plant size transformer is 12 years, not 10.
Okay. Well, and
That's if you order it today.
yeah, and that's with current manufacturing,
Mm-hmm.
which may or may not be the case in 10 years when we get there.
That's
true.
Let's show the video on Ivanhoe.
Video.
Thank you.
And a lot of that has to do with political choices. We took care of Hiroshima, took care of in a couple of years, Manhattan Project. We built the tunnels. Now it takes 20 years to even think about building this stuff that in World War II we built in 9 months.
Mm-hmm.
Stan?
Dan, you're muted.
I dropped the doc file into the chat for anybody who wants to see the videos from this presentation.
Okay, thanks. Oh, no, wait a minute. There are 6 videos on this presentation in that doc file that I did not expect to get to, or that were there so that we could refer to them if they came up in discussion.
That's good too. That's called planning.
Oh,
What a novel idea, planning him.
As in the military, they used to say prior planning prevents piss poor performance.
yeah, well, maybe. Please be aware that most of those videos we were never going to have time for. We'll be lucky to watch bits of 3 of them.
Let's go. Let's go. I'm permanently muting if there's such a thing.
Ha!
Ah,
Excuse me if I laugh, Steve.
I'm sorry, did you guys want to watch videos now?
Yeah,
Yes.
no, I asked you to queue up the one on Ivanhoe. I think it's the one about the electrical plant failure.
Is that, which one is it? Tell me which one it is in order. I got the doc file up now.
Huh.
Is it the second one or the third one or the fourth one?
It's the 4th one.
Climate's models are getting it wrong? What's going on?
No, I'm sorry. I'm looking at an old copy of the file.
The truth about China's renewable revolution?
When you put the climate chaos into the chat, I'm not able to open it. I don't know if anybody else has tried to open it.
I'm sorry. I learned how to put files like that into chat just recently. I haven't had a chance to test it.
I just tested it. It let me download it, but it didn't let me open it. I'm not looking at the same list that you are, unfortunately.
I've got the second one is the $2 billion solar farm failed.
That's the one.
Okay, that's the second one. Okay, here we go.
Just pay the first segment of that.
David, when I looked at mine, it allows you to copy the link.
Okay.
Biotic virus. Support the
The Ivanpah Solar Electric Generation System is also a concentrated solar power plant. It became famous in 2014, winning all sorts of awards and accolades and claiming the title as the world's largest solar thermal plant at the time. The complex is made of 3 independent power plants, or units. In each solar plant, one Rankine cycle reheat steam turbine receives live steam from the solar collector. Each plant also includes 2 natural gas-fired steam boilers, an auxiliary boiler, and a nighttime preservation boiler. So I know what you're probably thinking. This is a solar power plant, it's supposed to be clean and carbon-free, but it does have natural gas boilers. The idea is that it helps in the morning to get the entire system up to speed quicker, and it also helps in transient cloudy conditions in order to maintain the steam turbines. Ivanpah has a nameplate capacity of 386 megawatts across all 3 units, and the plant directly produces AC power, unlike the DC power that comes from PV cells. And Ivanpah, at its peak, provides electricity for 140,000 California residents. This plant cost $2.2 billion, about $5,600 per kilowatt. Now, this is going to be important here in a minute. And where did the money come from? $1.6 billion came from a loan from the Department of Energy, $300 million from NRG Energy, $168 million from Google, and $132 million from BrightSource, which is now called Kelvin Energy. And this absolutely massive site takes up about 3,500 acres in the high Mojave Desert. There's 173,500 computer-controlled heliostats, and they move to make sure that the sun coming in is always concentrated onto the central tower. And all in, they take up about 27 million square feet, or 627 acres of active energy capacity. Now the towers, of which there are 3, each are approximately 140 meters or 459 feet tall. That's 1.5 times the height of the Statue of Liberty. And then there is the receiver, which sits on the very top of each tower, collecting all the sunlight and boiling water. These receivers heat water to capture superheated steam and then run through a turbine. Very different from the Crescent Dune design, which had a tower of hot molten salt, which then ran through a heat exchanger to produce steam and then run the turbine. In many ways, Ivanpah was simpler, although the steam only could reach temperatures of about 510 degrees Celsius. Crescent Dunes operated at much higher temperatures thanks to its molten salt formulation, almost 1112 degrees Fahrenheit or 600 degrees Celsius. Now, another drawback of the thermal approach is that they require water. But before I get into this drop in solar panel power,
stop it right there.
Is
Oh, back up to, yes, thank you. This chart on the left, I believe, represents PV panels, and the blue dotted line or the red dots that are hard to see, yellow dots that are hard to see, are the costs, and across the bottom is the year, 2000, 2005, 2010, 2015, and 2020. And the right-hand chart is the concentrated solar power, the Ivanhoe plant, which was proposed in 2000, and they didn't actually get started building it till 2010, and it didn't produce electricity till 2014. Okay? The little yellow dots on that chart, probably one of them is Ivanhoe. But at any rate, the reason it's going bankrupt right now relates to the end point on either of those 2 charts. If you see the lowest dot on the CSP is at 2020 and is at about 100, whereas the lowest dots on the PV are at about 50 in 2020. So PV panel electric generation is about half the cost of the concentrated solar power in the large plants. Okay, there are some numbers for comparison. Any questions about that? Dean? You're muted.
We're throwing acronyms. PV is photovoltaic.
Yep.
And you
Yeah.
realize in a lot of ways this is history to me. I have driven to these plants when I was roaming around. But what is that break in the y-axis on the PV? What apocalypse happened in 2010 where PV got suddenly whatever amount cheaper? I don't get that, but anyway.
Well, if I were guessing, I would guess that the change occurred in the production costs in China. But that's a guess. I don't know what the difference is. I'm just saying that if you look at historically, one of the reasons that Ivanhoe went bankrupt is that if you watch the whole video, you'll see that he talks about the difference in the timeline between when it was proposed, when they started building it, when it was generating power, and the competition cost curve between PV and concentrated solar power. Okay? And that's all I really wanted to see of this video. Given our time, I'd like to show you the first 10 minutes of another video. And then I'd like to stop and we can talk about whether we want to see the rest of that video or whether we have more than enough to talk about. Carol?
I just want to make sure I'm understanding what you're saying here. You're saying that these power plants went broke because the cost of rooftop solar panels became so low.
Yes.
Okay. Just want to make absolutely certain that was the point.
That's not the only reason they went bankrupt.
Okay.
They're also very complicated. And oh, by the way, a mechanical structure in the desert where the wind blows sand into the gears takes a lot of maintenance. So their costs associated with trackers may not be worth the extra cost.
Got it.
Not only
But
trackers,
we're basically destroyed by the fact that the type of solar panel that Tom has on his roof got cheaper and cheaper.
That's certainly one of the factors. Stan?
I think that the fact that you had all those rotary devices on the mirrors, they were using gas to keep the power going on the reactor. The beauty of solar panels is that there's not a lot of mechanical maintenance involved.
There's another advantage. They typically are on the roof of the location that's using them. That's a big advantage in terms of line losses. There are a whole array of engineering trade-offs. And
pun intended, array?
No, that's the name. Engineering trade-off is going to be a trade-off. Yes, pun intended, if you will. Tom? H-Tom?
I have a friend who's a hog farmer in southern Minnesota. He has been building out a solar farm to provide the electricity for heat and ventilation and whatever. And he discovered that he is now making more money running a solar farm than he is running a pig farm because he's selling the power to NSP.
Yeah. Okay. Stan, would you give us the first 10 minutes of the last video, the next video?
Well, you say the last and the next. The last video
I'm sorry.
is how much progress have we made on climate change?
No, the one before that.
The geopolitics by Peter Zion?
No, nope, okay. What's the first?
The truth about China's renewable revolution?
That's the one.
You got it in here twice. You must have different points of.
Yes, I want to see the first 10 minutes of it. Oh, and I recommend the last of that also, but I haven't actually seen it, and I didn't think we'd have time to talk about it. One of the things we could have been talking about had we seen the rest of the discussion of nuclear from Rethink X, why is China providing so much nuclear power plants, so much nuclear power? Well, they get to brag on the fact that it is not fossil fuel based, although most of the time, all of the mining and materials production depends on fossil fuels rather than renewables at this point, even in China. Yeah, Don.
I'm sorry. Did you say me?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. I just wanted to share with you guys. Every time I see something like this and I see the BYD thing, it reminds me of back when I was on the governor's task force to try to save the Ford plant. And we all reached out to different organizations, and I reached out to BYD to maybe come in here and take over the Ford plant. And in the beginning, they said they were interested. And then I think the word got out about how bad the Ford plant was, and Ford had let it run down so bad and what it would take. And anyway, they declined after that. But, to me, it's just been interesting to watch the success of that company, in China and what they've done, whether it's buses or cars or whatever. So, who knows? Maybe we missed a great chance to get somebody here in town to do something.
Well, and the question is, did we eventually end up with something that was better long term than another car plant?
Yeah, they were intrigued by the fact that, it had the possibility of hydropower and all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And, even then they were thinking that, they were going to, clean it up from what it was. And the sad thing is what did develop there, the housing and everything, was had to guarantee, Ryan Company had to guarantee that they were going to use renewable energy. And as the weakness became evident in the mayor's office, they didn't do what they promised. So it ended up kind of a halfway deal as usual in our political system.
Yeah. And that's always a challenge with development is
We now have, and maybe you guys have heard about it, but we now have a place in St. Paul called the Heights that is going to be totally using geothermal. It's really good. I mean, it's a abandoned golf course that was poisoned by what they put on the greens, and now they've reclaimed it, and they're building all kinds of stuff, and they're actually working off of the aquifer. They're not getting water into it, but they're using the temperature of the aquifer to do the heating of the buildings and everything. So we
geothermal.
we still might end up with something, futuristic in St. Paul.
And if somebody wanted to do it, I think it would be a very interesting discussion of what the future energy use in the United States, what the future energy costs in the United States will do as far as making our goods competitive with China's goods. If China actually gets to net zero by 2060, that will be an incredible change in their electric system. If Rethink X is correct and we can transition to renewables in 10 years, that would actually put us at an economic advantage to China. But I would say that based on what our next 4 years are projected to look like, we're not going that way very strong. Carol?
Okay, just out of curiosity, how do these predictions stack up against Zihan's predictions of the Chinese economy's collapse in the next 10 years?
A very interesting question.
Yes.
On the one hand, geopolitics suggests that China has a difficult task ahead of them, and the COVID-19, shall we say, left China in the position of being not nearly as dependable for supply chains as we thought they were before COVID-19. On the other hand, it's not at all clear that the United States is going to be able to, quote, go it alone in the production of automobiles, electronics.
Solar panels?
We're in good shape for food, but that's really the only one that we think we're in good shape for.
Well, aren't we depending on China for most of our solar panels?
Yes, China definitely produces the cells that are put together into the panels, and at much lower cost than anyone else. Now, we could argue that they stole the technology or that we gave it to them. We could argue that they're not paying their people nearly as much, or the pollution is not nearly under control as well there as it would have to be here to compete with them.
And so there is hope on the horizon.
Well, yes, there's hope, but you also need government support.
Yep.
And that's trying to make our manufacturing more competitive worldwide. And there's a number of factors associated with doing that. And one of the big ones is cost of money, cost of capital. How much does it cost to build a manufacturing plant here in the United States to compete with China? And the thing about China, and there are a lot of reasons to want to say it's not fair, it's not a level playing field, because if they don't have to make a profit, if their corporations are in business to make jobs for their people, that's unfair competition with the capitalistic system that expects to make a profit. And typically, companies expect to make 15% on their money in profit. That's not really going to be competitive. So we might want to think about manufacturing cooperatives that just provide the jobs for the workers and don't have to make 15% profit. and don't have to pay 6% interest to borrow money from the federal government.
Duh.
David, good presentation. This is Doug. I got to go. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Bye-bye, Doug. Yeah, I mean, we get into a whole lot of things. I lived Maquiadoras. Maquiadoras was Clinton and yada yada. Oh yeah, they're gonna all this stuff. But we insisted to a limited extent that the standard of living for these slaves that we hire in Mexico to produce our goods at least meets some modicum of labor standards, et cetera, et cetera. Well, China, the totalitarian state, said, well, screw that. And also remember that all of the, quote, capital that the red Chinese government can fund all came from us and Europe, because we chose to send all of our money and our national debt over to China. And at some point, you know, we should just go bankrupt on their asses and leave them holding the bag. But yeah, it is so complicated in terms of human costs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yep, there are trade-offs.
Yeah, but you're trading off human lives and human dignity and human. Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
That's a lovely quote to end this conversation on.
Thanks for coming.
Loved it, David. Loved every minute of it.
Carol?
Yes.
A question for H. Tom about next time. Which Yuri are we talking about?
Yuri Gagarin.
Oh, okay.
It's Yuri's night.
One of my
Beautiful
favorite
stuff.
human beings.
Oh, and next week, I'm sorry, I let Stan go before we asked. I think he's planning to do the second half of his presentation on geothermal.
Ah,
Yeah, he expressed to me over the phone or whatever that was his hope, intent, or whatever. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I think that's what's coming next week.
And Uncle Hugo's just celebrated their 50th anniversary.
Wherever that is. Yeah.
Uncle Hugo's is a science fiction bookstore in Minneapolis.
Oh, all right.
It was burned in the distress
Floyd.
a couple of years ago.
George
Yes.
Floyd riots.
Wow.
but
Wow.
it goes from the ashes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a goal in our family. We're going to take pictures of my grandsons, Edgar and Hugo, in front of their stores. Is Uncle Edgar still there? I don't know if is Uncle Edgar still there?
Yeah.
Yes.
No. Well, the store is still in business, but they've moved.
Oh, so they're not right next to each other like
They're
they
not at the
No, they
same
are.
location.
They are in the same location, but it's a different location than they used to be.
Yeah,
Oh.
okay.
They're on 31st Avenue, just east of the precinct.
I guess we'll have to take two photos and somehow merge them or make it.
No, they're still in the same building. It's
Oh.
Yeah. Uncle Edgar's is still a part of Uncle Hugo's.
Oh.
They're both owned
Yep.
by the same owner.
Oh. If they have some sign or something that shows both their names, we could do a photo in front of that. No.
that should be very easy to do.
Oh, okay.
Your hand is still up, Carol?
No, I'm.
Yeah. You just ask AI, take the pictures and say, AI, create this, boom, done,
there you go.
milliseconds.
Yeah. I'll create a sign or whatever I need.
Right. And the expectation that our energy needs will double over the next 10 or 20 years, and so we need to invest in more nuclear, is not necessarily accurate. By the time the nuclear power plants are built, will we have figured out how to do large language model computer analysis with much more efficient computers? The answer is very likely. Gene?
But then we got to solve the Bitcoin mining problem because
No, read Easy Money before you talk about Bitcoin.
yeah, I'm familiar with it. I haven't read it yet.
Read it. It's worth reading,
Okay.
especially before you invest in Bitcoin.
Well, we're not talking. I would that I could. You know, I've
No,
done
we're
the math.
talking about the disaster that Bitcoin is to the environment.
Well, absolute environmental disaster. It costs more to mine a Bitcoin in energy. I mean, you know, we pay the cost of the few people that win that Ponzi scheme.
Well, yeah, exactly. And then the ethics of that, you're disadvantaging, basically you're exporting your costs.
Yeah.
You're not paying the real costs.
Of course. That's true. That's true of 90% of what we humans do here on this planet.
No. Capitalism, the trade-offs are that if you can possibly socialize your costs and privatize your benefits, that's capitalism in one form.
Benefits for whom?
Well, yeah, typically for the stockholders.
Exactly.
So.
End of story.
Yes.
Well, there are a number of stories that are worth talking about, and
Yes.
we probably should spend some time talking about sustainability. If it's not sustainable, is it ethical?
Well, I mean, Wall Street doesn't care about. They have various windows of sustainability.
Yeah, they have various propaganda related to sustainability.
Right.
Yes.
Well, yeah, but I mean sustainability of their profits so that they and their kids and their grandkids will be billionaires and F everybody else.
Well, and your notion of who is using how much energy should also include where the energy is coming from.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, for instance, hydroelectric energy is less of a problem for the environment than burning fossil fuels energy.
Yeah.
And hydroelectric, do you realize there were serious plans? There's another mini Yosemite, and I haven't been there for decades. I've been there half a dozen times because it's a zoo. But there is another, I forget the name, that's a mini Yosemite, and we chose to make it a reservoir. And there was serious talk about turning Yosemite Valley into an unbelievable reservoir. Mm-hmm. And we'd all have to be scuba qualified to. And by the way, when you talk about the bellwether of, I took up diving at a late age. At the very end, I got to see a few of the coral reefs. And every place I went, I go, oh, you should have been here 10 years ago. And the Great Barrier Reef, going, gone. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And yeah, all you have to do is, I mean, you become a believer in a sea level temperature rise in a heartbeat. Now, will the coral long-term adapt and survive and all that? Yes, but not in my grandchildren's lifetime.
Yeah, it comes back, but you have to stop disturbing it, and we're not stopping disturbing it.
Right, and there is data that shows if we can stop disturbing enough, it could come back in our and our children's lifetime.
Much faster than...
And nobody echoed Carol's point about the Gulf Stream. Well, that's a pretty important current last time I checked.
Mhm.
I mean, ask England. England would be Iceland without, or they'd be Greenland, without
Yeah.
the Gulf Stream.
Yeah,
The whole northwestern Europe would die in the cold without the Gulf Stream.
Absolutely, they would.
Eric?
Yeah, I wanted to ask if anybody had any solid data on progress in, well, the two things that I see that is clearly these various energy solutions like solar and wind and hydrothermal. I've seen a huge amount of that when we were out in Quebec, and is transmission costs and storage costs. Now, has anybody got any solid data? I hear articles once in a while or they've been claiming hope for great progress. I mean, Cameron said that it's not practical to transmit electrical power more than 300 miles. Is there any progress in sight or imminent improving that?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
look at the discussion of the energy backbone in the United States. There was a federal study done 10 years ago, and we haven't made much progress on it, but there is some progress on transmission. Clearly, you can transmit energy more than 300 miles in a superconductor at liquid nitrogen temperature.
We had that.
Well, and
Stan-
the cost has come down, but
Stan-
it hasn't come down as much as solar photovoltaic costs have come down.
Stan and I have had private Zoom discussions on that, and there is promising technology, high temperature, yada, yada, yada. But yeah, unproven. And the transmission cost is the same as electric cars, as in, can I hop in a car and drive to the East Coast without refueling, or, and so you solve that incrementally along the road. And yeah, the whole thing about, and we do not have an energy problem in this country. We have an electrical energy transmission problem.
And storage.
And storage,
Well,
which are one and the same in the end.
Well,
maybe.
The future of
certainly
thorium.
an advantage, as David pointed out, from having the solar panels on the roof of the house that's using it. No transmission issues.
well, limited transmission.
Very limited.
Right. All politics is local, and all energy ought to be local. And you could be building, out here at least, a solar farm, wind, whatever, that could power a small community owned, part of the cost of your home, and away you go. Geothermal, same thing. It's done better on small scale.
Mhm.
And the small scale means it can be built quickly as needed. Whereas if you talk about large geothermal plants or nuclear or thorium, or even if you really get down to it, the small nuclear modular reactors.
Backyard reactors, they've talked about them.
Well, but they're expensive to build.
Yep.
And could it be done if everybody did it? If everybody used small modular reactors, we could provide all the electricity we need, and we would run out of uranium at reasonable cost in 30 years. Is that
Maybe. We don't know that. We ran out of oil 20 years ago, and then shale and all that.
Well,
50 years ago, they were talking about how all the time the leftists, environmentalists were talking about how the world was going to run out of oil in 30 years.
Yeah.
No,
Now they don't even talk about
oil.
Saudi Arabia. How much reserve is the
Affordable oil.
Define affordable, what we're willing to pay.
Yeah, well, what about the Gulf states? What is their? I don't hear anything about their limits on their reserves anymore, or cheap oil. What are the limits? Does anybody know? Or
Oh yeah, it's readily available. You can
what
look
are
that
they?
up.
So someone's opinion of data is readily available.
Well, I think the one on that one that most people look to is BP, actually. They do a state of the world report
Okay.
every year.
All right.
You see the waste they do with their obscene profits. You talk about inequality of outcomes. I mean, look at what they're building, these absurd ego, what can you call them? Just sheer ego trips of building these gigantic new capitals in the desert and, all these.
Mhm.
Oh yeah, the
Well,
Middle East, yeah, ego architecture, ego
yeah,
capitalism.
it's just,
Yeah.
it makes me justify the argument of just taking the damn oil.
Me too.
Eating it.
No.
My dad told me years ago, he worked in the petroleum industry most of his life. And he said, the practical thing would be to turn the sand to glass because we have drills that'll go down through the glass and we will live happily ever after.
Yeah,
Well,
why
that's one
should these
approach.
guys have it that's on MJB or whatever his name is, the new de facto king of Arabia, who's just barbecues his opponent, his critics, or
Right.
crucifies them or beheads them or whatever. Why, morally, talking about ethics, why is it ethical that they should have all this vast wealth and power rather than
It's not.
because their
But
camels happened to walk over that land 100 years ago?
yeah,
Is that why they should have it and not we?
Beverly Hillbillies. He shot a thing in the ground, out came bubbling crude. Yeah. I mean, they wouldn't have found that on their own in 5,000 years.
Or made it of value.
Right.
Uh,
That's just a fact. It's not being Eurocentric or anything else. It's just a fact.
Well, and geopolitics essentially says the geology matters. And whether we're born in that country or a different country seems to be a matter of luck, right?
Oh yeah, you better believe it. I think somebody, as bad as it is here today, I say, well, I'm still pretty happy that I was born an American.
It
Well,
certainly could be
Oh, yeah.
worse.
yeah, David, would you rather live in China even if they are making more progress on sustainable
No.
energy?
They started at a much lower level
Yeah.
than we did. If you look, I've read recently, and I thought it was interesting to read this, that the height of people is a good measure of the prosperity of the site of the culture that they grew up in.
Yeah, compare North and South Korea. There's like 4 inches difference.
Exactly.
Basically, same genes, same IQ, and everything.
And look at the height of what's his face, the Chinese leader. He is tall. So
And it turns out that the height of the population of the 13 colonies in the eastern seaboard in 1800 was the highest in the world.
right.
That was a very prosperous set of colonies that revolted against the British king
Yeah.
and decided they didn't want to pay those taxes.
And it'll make you a multimillionaire in the NBA because if you're 6'11" or 7'2", you win.
Yeah.
Well, let's just say, and if you practice enough, you can get
Oh,
to
yeah.
be one of the best in the world.
You were given the tools at birth,
Yeah.
and up to you to learn how to use them.
Yep.
And I
Yeah.
might mention that the fact that Yuri Gagarin is one of my favorite people is slightly dependent on the fact that he was my height.
There you go. Absolutely.
Yeah.
He was 5'2".
Oh yeah. I mean, how many cars could I be driving if I wasn't 6'1.5"? Oh yeah, and fit comfortably in.
Oh, yeah.
And how many?
Otis.
I couldn't even own my motorhome if I was 2 inches taller, because I would already have scalped myself.
Lotus.
Yeah, my sons are 6'3" and 6'4". So.
Lotus.
I think we've probably carried this on enough for today, have we?
Oh, but more than enough. But yeah.
We could mention the fact that a good deal of China's leap forward was dependent on their one-child policy.
Oh,
Absolutely.
we haven't mentioned that? Oh, of course.
And we need to do that in terms of discussing ethics of climate
Yeah.
change.
And of course, now they're in a 5-child policy because their social system is going to go bankrupt. The same reason Japan is welcoming Koreans into their workforce, because otherwise the old people are done. You know, they got their birth rate.
Birth rate is even lower, I believe, than Japan's. They're just, I think they're the
Japan
world.
is like the lowest. Yeah.
I thought South Korea is about the lowest.
Well, I know, but
South Korea and Japan are both in the same boat. They've
yeah, right,
organized.
and they're competing for these brilliant, hardworking people.
Interrupting one another. Do it one at a time, so I can hear you.
Sorry.
David was talking.
I think we've carried this far enough, but overpopulation is certainly still an issue, and overshoot, which is population carrying capacity, is still an issue. Dean?
And it's not just overpopulation, it's which part of the Darwin part produces children. And it hasn't been the best part, the best being most fit for today's world.
Well, there's an interesting question too.
And yeah, what's it? Only large areas still rapidly increasing. Africa. Does anyone know what their average IQ is? I can show you. It's 71.
And
that's a fact.
All of this massive aid. Why can't we?
All of the
reducing their birth rates.
All of the brilliant people
we could
got out of Africa.
We don't. It hasn't. I don't see that in the numbers and the results.
Okay.
It's failed if they've tried.
Well, look at
Be
the
careful.
fact. Look
Be
at the
careful.
fact that
Be careful in washing your produce, especially your parsley. You do not want food poisoning.
Ooh,